Most corporate innovation dies before it ever gets a chance to leave.
The way that I see corporate innovation and corporate venture capital is like an organ transplant. Imagine that you put in a new liver into the human body.
But the body fights back.
The corporate immune system is so real, it's so big, but it's also a power of persistence, and it's something that you really have to treat carefully.
The cure isn't more capital, it's a strategic alignment.
Innovation and strategy is something that you need to combine. You need to have the internal alignment on everything. When you do this,
the numbers don't lie.
The challenge is still that the average lifetime of a CVC is 3.7 years.
Most corporate venture fail because they chase the wrong price.
First thing, don't do this for the money.
The survivor knows something different.
Be patient but urgent. It takes time to develop stuff inside of corporate. It is a very, very long game.
How do you make your corporate venture the exception, not the statistics? Join us as we reveal the survival playbook that turns corporate immune system into innovation engines.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Hello, everybody, and what everybody is the group of bright students from ESADE full-time MBA, particularly sign up for the course Entrepreneurial and Innovation Growth Strategies, which I will run soon in a couple of weeks down in Barcelona. And today is the day in which we gonna create this asynchronous contents in which you guys have the opportunity to reflect on some contents. I decided to use again the access to my network, and I'm very lucky to have a great network of a professional that can share with you some of the insights so you can reflect upon and also get ready for our course. So today we have we all have, certainly me as first, the pleasure of having here with us Jeppe Høier, business professional to me, but also a friend and someone I definitely interact with, learning a lot from, and growing together into the Danish and Nordic business ecosystem. First of all, welcome, Jeppe, and good morning.
Thank you so much for having me, Francesco.
So Jeppe is certainly an experienced venture investor, as well as the host of a podcast, but in general, I would say a newsletter writer, but he will telling you more about that. Certainly, Jeppe has very strong experience when it comes to corporate venturing and corporate venture capital in particular. And that's why I invited him, because while in the course, we're going to go on specific elements in details, right? And treat each topic separately about the corporate venturing world. I actually thought that Jeppe could give you somehow some helicopter perspective on, in general, the experience of being an expert for years in venturing and venture investing and corporate venturing. And so that's why I invited him. So welcome again, Jeppe. So I would like, therefore, to start with your story, right? So because each person has a story. And by the way, let me tell you that I'm very excited because Jeppe usually is the interviewer, and now I'm the interviewee, and I'm the interviewer of the master of the interviewer. So this feels a little bit of pressure. So
and it's scary for me too, Francesco.
So that's the beginning. So the story of a person. So what's your story? Can you walk us through your professional trajectory and maybe sharing a few learnings from each of the experience you've been going through so far?
So I'm actually an MBA in auditing. Started my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers back in the day, but as a young, impatient person, I wanted to try myself out. So I had a stopover at McDonald's Denmark Corp before I went into venture capital. In 2007, I started my career as CFO in Heartcore Capital, that is a pan-European venture fund, and did that for 10 years. I learned everything about venture capital, how to structure term sheets, how to do fundraising, how to raise funds, right? So it was a an immense playground of things that I could do because it was up to me what I wanted to learn and what I wanted to act upon. It also became clear to me that I wanted to try myself out as an investor. So I went into a discussion with the partnership at Heartcore Capital and decided that it was time for me to break out. And I was lucky to be approached by Maersk Growth, where they hired me in to be part of building their corporate venture fund and basically their corporate venture activities, because what they mostly do today is what we call corporate clienting. So the collaboration between corporates and startups without an equity flow. I stayed a good 5 years with Maersk Growth. Some of the key learnings from my time there is that innovation and strategy is something that you need to combine. You need to have the internal alignment on everything when you do this. Otherwise, it's going to be so hard for you to survive. And we will come back to that. What I do today is that I advise large international venture funds and corporates across Europe and also across the globe. Recently, I've been advising a company in Washington building their corporate venture arm. Again, today, I was writing a newsletter that today is a podcast on EU CVC, and here in August, we're actually launching our first conference, which I'm looking forward to. One of my big takeaways from all of this is that the corporate immune system is so real, it's so big, but it's also a power of persistence, and it's something that you really have to treat carefully.
I think it's a very interesting perspective, this corporate immune system. So this is something that we also have been discussing recently, Jeppe, you and I, how for corporate on the one hand need to understanding intertwined relationship between innovation and strategy. At the same time, for some reason that had probably not clear necessarily to them, they kind of resist to some changes when it comes to entrepreneurial program such as corporate venturing, and it's great for sure to a professional like you that can actually advise and open a conversation internal to the corporate to grow through this entrepreneurial venture. So that's fantastic. So fundamentally, you cover from investing, hardcore kind of finance down to the strategy part in venturing in general. That's really rich, I would say. But
and I think just one on the immune system, right, Francesco? Because normally the way, and you have heard me tell the story so many times, the way that I see corporate innovation and corporate venture capital is like an organ transplant. It's like, imagine that you put in a new liver into the human body. What you then have to do to make the body overcome that is to take a lot of drugs. So if we take the anecdote over to corporates, right? The mind, the C-level, the board, they know they need the innovation. So they put in the liver. What they have to do all the time to not expose the liver from the body being the organization, right? It's not invented here. So it needs to get out of there, is that they have to communicate about it all the time. Otherwise, it's not gonna be present, right? So C-suite and board, they need to communicate all the time. Otherwise, it's not going to survive. So that's just that anecdote.
And I can't agree more. And this is also my personal mantra that CVC or corporate venturing in general requires innovation mindset, requires investing abilities, but requires most importantly organizational will from the board down to the operations to make this like a very consistent and solid approach to how to do business. Moving now away a little bit from the hardcore business vocabulary, the newsletter, right? So this is how a lot of people, tons of people out there know you for. You've been extremely generous to the community to create and start this newsletter to offer reflections, inviting speakers, fundamentally offering critical views, and most of the time insightful, that allow the business community interested in these topics to keep thinking and create a community as well. So I think in a way, your newsletter has been not only a device to information gathering, but also community building. Fantastic to me as well. And that's also how I come to meet you, fundamentally, and to know you. So can you tell a little bit the story? Because now I also know that you shifted to EUVC. So can you explain to our people what EUVC is? And yeah.
Yeah. So when I left Maersk, I decided to do a little bit more digging into corporate venturing and what does it really encompass, right? What's in there? The learnings that I wanted to share immediately was, of course, my venture capital background and then the Maersk growth story. So I started writing a newsletter out of my LinkedIn profile. Works pretty nicely. Did the first 70 episode, interviewed people like yourself on the newsletter. But it was more, I had to plan, to meet you. Then we had to do an interview, the script before, and then I would produce the newsletter, and then I would release it out. That also was kind of, on my own base. What I learned quickly was that it was a rough task, and then podcast became a more and more natural thing. So I hooked up with a Dane, I'm a Dane myself, that I didn't know of. It's a guy called Andreas Høier, and he's running the EUVC Podcast. So that podcast is everything about venture capital and their investors. So Andreas has interviewed more than 400 managing partners over the past 2-3 years.
Wow.
Very, very knowledgeable about what he does. So we decided to combine our efforts. Actually, one of the reasons why we did that is that 25% of the capital flowing into venture capital comes from corporates. So it's a nice, clear addition. What I'm very focused on today is how corporates can leverage their existing business to create new businesses. So that is super, super important for me. But again, I'm sharing, how the CVC playbook works. I have my own model of how to describe it. And today we're actually up on 85 editions, and the newsletter today is more of a podcast. We have had, a lot of people on the podcast, from TDK Ventures over Toyota with Bowen Capital, Maersk, Vira, to professors across the globe, yourself and also Ilya Strebulev out of Stanford. And what it actually is to bring Europe as a meaningful place for startups and corporates to play, right? Because we are 27 countries in Europe that are all playing together, and we need to build this ecosystem, right? So that's the base of it. What we do also on the podcast is we do the summits. We also do masterclasses. So if you want to become an expert in portfolio modeling, we can help out with that. And we can do LP introductions and basically just show the visibility for corporates and startups. It's an ecosystem play.
I think it feels very much that this collaboration that then became fundamentally sort of a merge in a way with EUVC is bringing your initial intuition to build this community to the next level, because now you're not only having the corporate view, but now actually you can bring also the VCs, which complete, if you wish, the most important entrepreneurial finance actor when it comes to venture investing. So it seems that it feels like a natural evolution to bring to the next level of community building. It's really impressive, fantastic.
For sure. I think the interesting overlap between the two, right, is that venture capital is pure financial driven. It's about, creating the next unicorn, make a lot of returns for your investors. When you go over to the corporate venturing side, right, your own data shows that, especially here in the Nordics, right, the corporates, they play for a strategic reason. But I think you really have to dive deep into that, because when you start asking the corporates the questions, the outcome is really that they're in there for financial purpose. They don't throw money in the harbor, as I normally say, right? They are doing it for a financial reason in the end, right? And that is where we need to bring the parties together, right? Sometimes I feel that I'm schizophrenic, because I kind of have to remind the corporates that they are financial investors, even though that the upbringing inside of a Maersk or a TDK is a strategic one. It is not, right? It is a financial reason to be there.
And that's something that we will discuss with the students a lot. As a spoiler, most likely Nick from BP Ventures someone that you also have interacted with, will join the course as a speaker exactly to also insist on this very important element that you put on the table, which is the tension between financial goals, strategic goals. So because you've been interviewing so many professionals, if you have to tell us like few stories or someone that particularly impressed you more, or you just remarked out of your pocket, so can you provide us any example and maybe learnings or what had been interesting for you when you interviewed those people?
There's a lot of important things in there when you meet people. I like especially people that dream big and like to swing for the fences, because that's what needed, right? Venture is a 10-year commitment when you do investments in startups. Of course, there are other elements when you do corporate venturing where it makes sense to have a shorter time frame. But in general, when you do these initiatives and there are people out there, right, saying that to be successful, you need to survive 3 CEOs, right? It's not about time. It's not about financial return. It's a matter of the strategic footprint that you have done on your corporation. And I think one of the more ambitious people that are out there is Nicolas Sauvage out of TDK Ventures. Here, TDK is not a European or an American company, right? It comes from the Far East with an HQ in the Valley. But the way that Nicolas has structured is very impressive, right? They're now running on their second fund generation. And also, a key learning also from my time. There's nothing wrong with starting small and build from there as long as you have the visions, right? If you start small and you hire the right people externally and internally, engage with the ecosystem, you can show what you can do internally, right? And that is what Nicolas has done, right? Also, his engagement with global corporate venturing is quite impressive. And with Jim, or James Mawson as he's named, right? That is quite impressive. So definitely go in, have a look at Nicolas Sauvage.
So take TDK Ventures.
Yeah, TDK Ventures. Great example. Another one I would bring up is a Canadian lady called Nicole LeBlanc. She used to work here in Copenhagen for a venture fund called 2150, but she got hired by Toyota to be a main driver of their growth fund. It's a $800 million growth fund called Woven Capital. And Woven Capital invests from Series B and onwards, but they also do fund-of-fund investments. And I think that's a tremendous thing. I know we'll get back to it, but I think, that is super, super exciting. So today, Nicole actually lives a lot of her time in Japan, as Toyota is located there, but she travels the globe, right, and is looking for how to engage. We're working a lot with her and her team as they're trying to expand into Europe and get their hands on things here. I think, a key takeaway from my podcast with her, is that strategic alignment doesn't have to slow you down, right? If your mandate is clear, you can connect in, and she's one of the ones that need support internally to move this ahead, right? Super interesting to follow.
And it's interesting because you actually are kind of pointing to examples of corporate that are not necessarily American, we all know that the portfolio many of the corporates look at America and North America, right, the US, as a primary source of deal flow. But it's interesting because the east of the world, let's say Asian corporate, are a little bit less explored, as I also want to show the data to the students. So it's very fascinating that through your interviews, you can actually open a kind of a window on those corporates.
Sure, it's talking about Europe and what is going on in Europe, and that is a nice reflection, and that's something that we need to do in Europe, right? We need to get Europe on the map, and I think a last podcast I would bring up is my former colleague Ida Brun from Maersk Growth, right? So as Ida describes in the podcast, right, they're on their fund 3, you can say, or their third try, because you pivot a lot in corporate venturing, and they're now more focused on corporate clienting. But they also do direct investments still, right? So they do have CVC activity that is more closely connected to green fuel investment, right? To turn Maersk and the ships more green, right? And I think the key takeaway there is, well, as long as you're open internally in a big corporation and you talk about the challenges, you know that you shouldn't close down corporate venturing activities. You should continue, but evolve over time, right? And the Maersk Growth Initiative was established in 2016 and is still alive, right? With a new way of doing things.
And I think this is a very, Ida and Maersk Growth, apart from being an environment that you know very well, obviously, but I also do too. And apart from any a clear connection, even like a local champion, if you want, or the Nordic champion, is truly a global positive example of how pivoting in corporate venturing can help to keep CVC units alive and evolve, to serve different purpose. And you mentioned also venture clienting. We're going to also look at with the students about that as well, as a new emerging strategy to look at more closely. So then if you actually now have to take a little bit more again from these a few cases, and I'm sure all the other one that we don't have the time to mention has been tremendously impactful in understanding the world of corporate CVC. And I invite everybody to go to the newsletter and the podcast and look at the materials, learn from each of these professionals. If you have to now kind of maybe look at from your perspective, few trends of your view in CVC and a few trends, what would you actually say is the landscape today for corporate venturing?
Yeah. No, I think today we're not anymore discussing about if you should do CVC. It's more how, right? So there has been established a lot of frameworks, but we are so far now, right? It's not about being aware of this. It's just more how we implement it. The challenge is still that the average lifetime of a CVC is 3.7 years. Just over the past month, I learned about 2 other corporates that are closing down, right? And I think again, it's lack of long-term strategic planning. It's a lack of C-suite disconnect, right? All you people listening in, right? You need to share the stories, talk to your C-suite about it. This is important. And then again, a difficult part is how do you measure success? What are the metrics, right? I'm sure, Francesco, you will share that with everybody, but it's so important that you have some metrics because they tend to be soft. Because the financial ones, you will not have valuation increases, you will not have exits in the first couple of years. So all of this is very, very important. I think what we are seeing, and that's a discussion that the two of us are having, right? We are seeing a focus more over on venture clienting and the collaboration there. I think there are some details in there that you need to be aware of, right? Because you're using a lot of FTE, you're using a lot of time from your corporate colleagues when you do this. So it's important to have that in mind. Where you then look at, direct investment, you can actually do that with fewer people. So I think, that's a key thing to be aware of. What I've seen lately and a dialogue with a couple of Germans is a very clear focus on fund-of-fund strategies. So, and that is something that I promote to my clients as well.
Can you maybe quickly explain to the one less familiar with the fund on this? Yeah.
Yeah. So what a corporate can do is to decide to invest into a venture fund instead of direct into a startup. What you get out of that is that you can actually learn how to do investments because you can interact with these venture funds. You will build an ecosystem at the same time with these professionals, and then they can do introductions to you. So oftentimes I explain it as being a due diligence course, right? But you gain so much out of it, and you also get the financial return if you pick the right fund of funds. Here, I would go out and ask for professional advice in the ecosystem And there are special funds out there that can help you with this, right? So I think that's a little bit on the fund of fund part, right?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point of view, the one you bring on the table. There is this idea that being a GP is the way to go, but perhaps an initial step as an LP, kind of, and then GP later on, and keep maybe rolling the ball in these two roles without committing to either is potentially creates a lot of learning at the moment. But again, as you said, probably C-suite, there is a need of vision into this. There is a need of commitment, and we all agree on this. It's very exciting times. We all know that when economic cycles are a little bit bumpy, as we are now, and the short-termism is really like a very big obsession of the C-suites. But as you correctly pointed out, being a champion in venturing as a corporate means also having a long-term view, right? And building kind of qualitative approach on returns before hardcore measuring quantity. All this takes a very big managerial vision. So now turning perhaps to our crowd, which are MBA students with quite some years of experience, but still kind of at the beginning of the long journey to make an impact as managers. So which type of advice would you give to these young professionals that would like to look at a career in CVC or in generic corporate venturing?
First thing, don't do this for the money. I know there's a lot of story that you can become quite wealthy out of venture capital or private equity. I think when you look into the data, it will show you that there's another way to go about this. I'm very pro going, corporate and learning how a corporate works, because what you then need to do is to understand the venture capital handcraft, right? You need to know everything about how to do legal documents. You need to know the power laws of venture capital, that the return is in the long tail. It's really about creating the unicorns and doubling down. Then I think, this second, you need to master internal politics in corporates, right? CVCs is about, 50% being about the deal. The other 50% is stakeholder alignment, right? So you really need to get high up in a corporate, be on a vice president level, talk to your peers, understand their challenges, and then help solve that for them. Lastly, I would recommend, be patient but urgent. It takes time to develop stuff inside of corporate. It is a very, very long game, but the value you can create of leveraging corporate assets in venture capital is so fulfilling and giving, right? So I think I will end with that for all of you, but interesting. If you love tech, go into this. If you love working with founders and great ideas, then this is the right place to be, definitely.
Thank you for this few advices, but very important to our young professionals that are about to venture themselves into the big jungle of building a career. And is a fact that jobs in this area of corporate venturing are certainly there. Companies are committed, meaning they actually need people. And I think having the opportunity to have you today is fantastic in this sense, because it's a great example of the combination of all those elements that are needed, right? As you mentioned yourself, from finance to strategy, understanding corporate stakeholder management, and love for tech. And understanding also what it means being a small firms as well. So guys, I hope you get actually quite inspiration for this. I first of all want to thank you for your generosity in giving us time and sharing with us your journey and your insights. Second, thank you so much for always be so clear and direct, which I think helps to really understand what's actually is on the grill behind the smoke. And it's something that I really appreciate about you. And I hope the students will appreciate too, because again, there is a lot of hype, as we know, in the world of venturing, but understanding those few concepts clearly could actually be very impactful for the future of building a career, understanding the topic. And finally, I think your work is really helping to shape a lot the European corporate venturing landscape, the one that you've been doing in different funds and the one you actually keep doing now as a community builder. I can only say thank you as a member of the community, but also candor, but thank you for offering your view and keep pushing on this. Thank you for today, Jeppe.
Yeah, and grazie mille, Francesco, for having me, right? And and looking forward to having you on stage at the EUC summit in Copenhagen in August.
Yeah, let's push this agenda together. Jeppe, thank you so much. Wish you a beautiful day and talk to you soon.
Likewise. Take care, my friend.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.